Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of our podcast with me, Michal Offer, functional nutritionist, and my partner in crime, functional medicine doctor, Dr. Shabnam Das-Kar, who has just returned from speaking at a worldwide conference in Malaysia. So I'm glad to connect with you again, Dr. Kar. Welcome back, and I'm so excited about what we're speaking about today.
Thank you, Mikhail. Yes, this is a topic we get a lot of questions on, right? So what are we talking about today?
So the questions that I get the most from people embarking on lower carbohydrate diets or starting to watch their carbohydrates or even on fasting protocols is, what about sweeteners? Some sweeteners don't have calories. Can I have those? On the package, some sweeteners look like it doesn't have carbs. So clearly that's not impacting my carbohydrate intake for the day. What's the deal with all these sweeteners that aren't sugar?
Yes. So I'm going to start with a screen share of a PowerPoint because I guess I'm just more dependent on a PowerPoint.
No, it's great to have, because that way everyone can get the visual for what you're talking about, because we're going to get into some scientific information here.
Mm-hmm. So what are the sweeteners that we are going to talk about? And I just learned 3 new names from Mikhail just a minute ago. So these are the ones: sucralose, acesulfame, potassium. You can see that long list. And the new ones I got to know about today from Mikhail were the Suave, the Lakanto, and the Yacon. So I basically kept the generic names for most of them because many of these sweeteners are known by different commercial names in different countries. So it's very important to know what exactly, the sweetener you're looking at, what does it contain. So when you go shopping, look for these words. Maybe you want to take a note of these, the different ones. So first of all, this again goes back to the thinking of, low calorie diet and how you need to count every calorie. So they have been popular as non-caloric sweeteners. And Mikhail and I have done a video sometime back where we talked about, sugar is not just empty calories. So I'll post the link to that as well. So it's on the playlist on our website, and you can go through that where we talk about what sugar does besides being a caloric sweetener. So naturally, when we start talking about low carbohydrate sweeteners, these are some of the popular ones. So, and I didn't write artificial sweeteners because I know some of you are going to tell me, oh, monk fruit and stevia are natural. So this was a study which came out in December 2016 in the International Journal of Obesity. So they checked whether, aspartame, monk fruit, stevia, and sucrose sweetened beverages. So sucrose is our table sugar. So what did they do? So these people, they had the regular breakfast, then they went in, and this was, I think, in Singapore. So they went in for this clinical study, and they were given these as liquids. So then after that, they were allowed to have lunch. Now, ad libitum lunch is the medical version of all-you-can-eat buffet. So they could eat. They could eat as much as they wanted to. Ad libitum sounds way better. Anyway. So what did they find? Now, we think that, monk fruit and stevia are natural and they're not going to do all those metabolically active stuff that the rest of the things do, like sugar does. So taking aspartame, monk fruit, or stevia was related to spikes in blood sugar and insulin. Now, many of you have heard Mikhail and me talking about, how fat loss is a problem of hormones and biochemistry, and insulin is one of the major hormones we talk about. So it's not enough to have something not spiking just your blood sugar. We are also concerned about insulin. So monk fruit, stevia, these are, what you would call natural sweeteners. So they are not absolutely innocuous because you don't want your insulin going up, and you for sure don't want your blood sugar going up. So what happened is they found that all those people who had taken these non-nutritive sweeteners, that is aspartame, monk fruit, or stevia, they ate more at the all-you-can-eat buffet. So, yes, calories, we always talk about calories, only calorie counting doesn't matter. But then, yeah, for some people, like eating too much can make a difference, So as I always say, food is signal to your genes, food is signal to your gut microbiome, food is signals to all your, different hormones. Then what about erythritol and xylitol? I'm just going to move this around so that you can see what this test was. So erythritol and xylitol are two of the ones which we talk about quite often. And what did they do? So this was a study that came out in the American Journal of Physiology, Endocrinology, and Metabolism, 2016. So 10 lean and 10 obese volunteers were given 75 grams of glucose, 50 grams of xylitol, or 75 grams of erythritol. And this is like separately, it's not like all of them together. But you'd notice that 50 grams of xylitol and 75 grams of erythritol is quite a lot of sweetener, right? So what did they find? They found that insulin and plasma glucose were not increased dramatically by erythritol or only slightly by xylitol. So again, bear in mind that most of you are probably not going to eat 50 grams of xylitol together. Neither are you going to eat 75 grams of erythritol at a time. However, if you were to choose a sweetener, and Mikhail is going to talk more about what you would use a sweetener for, then probably these would be the ones. And again, everybody has a personalized response. So a personalized response to any of these sweeteners, you can check by checking your blood sugar, either as a continuous monitor or using a glucometer. However, what we can't check is insulin, because insulin is not a hormone that you can check by, using something like a small little device. So very important to bear in mind, it's not just the blood sugar rise, it's also the insulin rise that we're concerned about. So what about, this? So what did they do? This particular study, they checked, I think, for sucralose, aspartame, and saccharin. So what they found is artificial sweeteners induce glucose intolerance by altering the gut microbiota. So they mess up the gut microbes, and that makes people more prone to develop diabetes, high risk for diabetes for that. So glucose intolerance is not something you want. So that is making you prone to diabetes. And the other very interesting way, it's like so much of new information comes out. It's the tastes and taste receptors in the gut. So it's not just the taste receptors in your tongue. We say that, all our problems are just in that little bit of, from the food going into the mouth and you liking a taste. No, it's way beyond that. It turns out that your gut has, these taste receptors as well. And that influences the blood sugar response and, all the metabolism as well. So now this was a study for, again, I'm so sorry, I'm just having to move my, window around. So what happens is they tested for sucralose, acesulfame K, and risk for diabetes. So this was a study, quite a recent one actually, September 2017, came out in Diabetologia. So 27 people were given sucralose and acesulfame capsules, so which was equivalent to about 1.5 liters of diet beverage. And they were given for 2 weeks. So in as little as 2 weeks, they were at a higher risk for developing diabetes. So these were not people who were diabetic. So just 1.5 liter equivalent of diet beverage. So it's like essentially probably one of those big bottles, is it, of the diet beverage? I remember once at, somewhere we had gone to visit some people, and I knew this guy was diabetic, and he was, he reached out for a diet drink, and I had a glass of red wine. So I couldn't help it. I said, you know what, you're probably better off having the wine than that diet beverage. We should have seen the look he gave me.
That's funny.
I know. But then, of course, he was too well-mannered to tell me that, you don't know what you're talking about. I shouldn't have kept my mouth shut. Anyway, so honey and jaggery. Now, Mikhail, this is probably not something you're familiar with. this is so common in India because everyone thinks, oh, I'm not having the sugar, those white crystals, but honey and jaggery are natural. No, they're sugar too.
We get that here in Canada, right? Jaggery isn't as popular, but we have maple syrup.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Maple syrup are natural, but they're
Yes.
natural for you.
So jaggery, honey, maple syrup, all of them are sugar. So now I think, how Mikhail is going to talk a lot more about it because she is an expert at helping you overcome your sugar habits. And so what do Mikhail and I usually recommend when we are talking to somebody about getting rid of the sugar habit? So you can use these non-sugar sweeteners only as props, but not like a regular thing every day. So they're kind of like your trainer wheels when you're moving from, eating more sugar to lower sugar. Not only lower, we want you to stop cold turkey, but I know it's not easy always. So just to help you tide over that, so temporarily it's fine to have these non-sugar sweeteners just as props. So, Mikhail, I'll hand over to you now. I know you have a lot of wonderful information for people. I'll just go back to the slide which has the list of the other sweeteners.
Thanks, Dr. Carr.
Oh, yeah, this is the one.
One of the things that I like to do is make it simple for people, right? Because what happens is we get caught up in the minutiae of things. We get caught up in the details.
Yeah.
And that stops from seeing the big picture.
Exactly.
So we understand that if it tastes sweet, it is going to impact, it is going to create a hormonal response based simply on the taste of sweet. Dr. Carr has explained that. It creates a response in our gut. It creates a response with our hormones. So it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a blueberry, or it could be a teaspoon of white sugar, or it could be the golden syrup that you're pouring down your throat. They all stimulate that sweet response. Yes, some will do it significantly more than others, but they will all stimulate that response. And it's really important to understand this because evolutionarily, if you look at how humans came into being, when food was most available was in the late summer, right? That's when all the fruit is nice and ripe. And right after the summer and the autumn is winter, where food is not so prevalent. And in India, not quite as much, but in Canada, there's a definite difference between availability of food in summer and winter. So how we evolved is to know that in that late summer, we must eat all these foods to store them as fat so that we can get through the winter. And we developed an unbelievable taste for sweet. And the more sweet we have, the more sweet we want, we crave it, we want it. It makes us feel good in our brain. And it doesn't matter where the sweet comes from for it to trigger that response. That is why no matter which, in the study that Dr. Carr showed you, no matter which sweetener the people had, they could still eat more at the all-you-can-eat buffet because sugar stimulates the appetite. Again, it's one of the hormonal responses is, oh, sweet is here. It must be the end of summer. Let's eat as much as we can. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world where there is a lot of added sweet, and winter never really comes because that added sweet is available 24/7, 365. So our bodies haven't yet caught up. Like evolutionarily, our genes haven't quite caught up and adapted to the fact that there is no more winter. I mean, there might be physically, but when it comes to food, there is no more winter. And it's really important to understand this because one of the tricks to being successful when you're lowering your carbohydrates is to really desensitize your taste for sweet. The more sweet we have, the more sweet we want, the more sweet we need. And we don't think of the taste of sweet as we would a drug addiction, but we all know that when it comes to drugs, be they pharmaceuticals or illegal drugs, we often develop tolerances for them, and we have to up our doses to get the same response. And it's the same with sweet. The more we have, the more we want, the more we need to get that feel good feeling. And at the same time, it's still stimulating all those hormones. It's still saying, go, 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 get some more, store some fat, winter's coming. So in the big picture, I know this has been a long lecture, and you guys are probably rolling your eyes a little bit. But in the big picture, we really need to understand the place of sweet in our lives, and that the big goal isn't to just replace one sweet with another. It's to desensitize or resensitize our taste buds and our bodies to what sweet really does. And as you go on this journey, what you will find is things start to taste different. And we start to notice the real tastes in things like fruit, which right now might not seem that sweet. So understand that anything that tastes sweet needs to be treated like a recreational drug. All right, we're just going to put that on the table. So I'm not saying go nuts. I am, however, saying that we all need to live on this planet, and having a dessert every now and then is not a bad thing. And the stress of, oh, I can't have that, and freaking out about it every single minute of every single day is not healthy. And there is definitely a place for food and for sweetness in celebration and in social interaction. Note that I said a place. I didn't say it's part of your everyday life. It's not. You have to think of it as something special, and something that you do once in a while. So if you're following your low carbohydrate eating program, for most of the time, it will allow you to have sweet some of the time, and for your body to actually cope with that unbelievably well. So we'll have that little bit of a hormonal response. The body does okay with a huge amount of stress in a very small amount of time, and then it carries on. You might find you have some cravings for a day or two, but you're very aware of what's going on, which is great. So you're probably saying, okay, so what do I eat? Well, if we're looking at sweeteners, I have definite rules on how to choose them. Number one, if it's an artificial sweetener, that means if it is a man-made sweetener, never, ever, 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 ever consume it. Ever. Have I said that loudly enough? Never, ever consume it.
Loud and clear.
It is poisonous to your gut bacteria. All the studies prove it. What do we call an artificial sweetener? Sucralose, acesulfame potassium or acesulfame K. That's also here called Splenda, aspartame, and saccharin. And it's a funny story, but very originally, aspartame and sucralose were developed because saccharin was so bad. And what they've actually found is that the sucralose and the aspartame are even worse than the saccharin. And you've heard me say it before, when you take something out of a food and replace it with something else, you have to worry. What did you replace it with? Is it worse? Okay, so artificial sweeteners off the table. Then we have two specific types of sweeteners, and you'll see they're actually divided on Dr. Carr's list really well. On the left-hand side, everything that's left are what we would call low caloric or non-caloric sweeteners. Some of them are naturally occurring. Some of them are sugar alcohols, which are derived generally from naturally occurring products. They're not a chemical composition in a lab, which the artificial sweeteners are. How do you tell the difference? A sugar alcohol will always have an OL at the end. So you'll see them as xylitol and erythritol are the most popular in the low carbohydrate world. You also have maltitol, which they use a lot in processed sugar-free foods. And maltitol tends to behave very much like a higher carbohydrate sweetener. It does elicit more of an insulin response. So in our world, we like xylitol and erythritol. Then we have stevia, which is a herb that has a very sweet herbaceous taste. If you eat it naturally, it's quite nasty. And be very careful of how your stevia is processed, because often stevia is so processed and it's mixed with so many other chemicals that it really is no longer natural. Stevia is not going to taste like sugar. There's going to be a little bit of a strange aftertaste. You get used to it. Also, you shouldn't be having that much of it. So it's okay. Monk fruit, again, is another one of those, check the processing, because it's often mixed with something else. Now, the two at the bottom of the list, Swerve and Lakanto, are the two most popular name brands for blends that tend to taste the most like sugar as we know it and tend to work the most like sugar as we know it. And Swerve is a blend of erythritol and stevia. Now, erythritol, when it is properly derived, and if you're getting non-organic erythritol, it comes from genetically modified corn. That's what they make it from. So again, if you're looking to reduce those carbohydrate foods that spike insulin and you're eating something that's derived from corn, on a molecular level, it has to be doing the same thing. It's corn. Anyway, I digress. So Swerve is a mixture of stevia and erythritol. Erythritol tends to have a minty aftertaste. Swerve tends to balance that a little. Stevia tends to balance that a little bit, and you can get Swerve in a 1-to-1 ratio to bake. Lakanto is the same. However, it is a monk fruit erythritol blend, and you can get it in a brown form as well, so it works a little bit more like brown sugar. Again, if you're getting a blend, be mindful. PepsiCo, so you know, who makes Pepsi and all of the other soft drinks with sugar and diet soft drinks, makes something called Truvia. And Truvia is an erythritol stevia blend. That's great. But where's Pepsi getting their erythritol from? The same place that they're getting their high fructose corn syrup from. So again, you want to choose a brand that you know is well produced and isn't derived from shady product. And you might pay a little more for it, but again, sweet is a treat. Sweet is not something you should be having every single day. So paying a little more sometimes sometimes even makes it more so, because we don't want to be spending huge amounts of money of our food budget just on the stuff you put in your tea or your coffee. On the other side of the chart, we have the naturally occurring sweeteners that are caloric in some way. So honey, yes, it's natural. Yes, it has some vitamins, minerals, and nutrients in it. If you can get raw honey, it even has some probiotics in it. Do not give raw honey to pregnant women or to babies under 2 years old because of that. But honey is still sweet. Honey will still spike your blood sugar. It has both fructose and sucrose in it. Honey is much sweeter than table sugar, so you might use a little less, but it's still going to make you want more. It's still going to trigger those cravings, spike the insulin, spike the blood sugar, and increase your carbohydrate count for the day. Jaggery as well, it's derived from a fruit. Same idea. Vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, fantastic. Not processed as much in a facility, but still has carbohydrates in it, still spikes your insulin, it's still going to give you that whole sugar response. Maple syrup, a popular one here in Canada, absolutely delicious. Same idea. It's the concentrated sap of a tree. Agave is the one that I'm going to say avoid at all costs. Avoid at the same costs that you avoid the sucralose, the acesulfame potassium, the aspartame, and the saccharin. Why? Because agave is pure fructose. And as we've spoken about in some of our other podcasts, fructose is metabolized in the liver only. So it might not spike your blood sugar, which it doesn't. So agave was always given to diabetics, but it does overload your liver with too much fructose, which then gets stored as fat and gives you fatty liver disease. So no, agave, no. Yacon syrup, again, is another naturally derived syrup. It's slightly lower in carbohydrate than honey, jaggery, or maple. It has a few vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, some prebiotic fibers in it. Again, though, these are all used in moderation, and depending on what you're doing with the rest of your carbohydrate profile in your diet, do these have a place? And then you have coconut sugar or coconut nectar. Often treats that you buy in the store will say sugar-free, and they'll have coconut nectar on them. And because it doesn't say the word sugar, people don't understand that that is sugar. And again, it's sweet, it's more natural, it doesn't raise the blood sugar quite as much as regular sugar, but it still raises the blood sugar. It still has a glycemic, what they call a glycemic response. So deciding, I'm not going to tell you, other than the ones that I've obviously said avoid at all costs, to include sweetener or not include sweetener in your life. You know, as Dr. Carr had said, as a transition, some of these work really well. But the ultimate goal is to reduce the sweetness intake. That is the goal. The goal is not to substitute the sweetness intake. It's to reduce the sweetness intake. And what often happens is people do substitute. We look, rather than to change the way that we're eating and looking at food, we just look at substituting other things for the same foods that we've eaten. And when people come to me and they say, you know, I did what you said with the low carbohydrates and it's not working, more often than not, this is one of the reasons why, is that people are using replacements rather than actually changing the way that they think about food. Fruit has a place in our diet, again, as a treat. It's not fruit and vegetables, they're the same. Fruit is a condiment. Sweeteners have a place in our diets. They are a treat. Once in a while, that's fine. But be aware of how they impact you, whether they say healthy or not, whether they seem healthy or not. Sweet is sweet is sweet. And once you've chewed and swallowed it, your hormones don't know the difference, right? Your body might metabolize it slightly differently, but the hormonal response, which begins with the taste of sweet, begins with the taste of sweet. It doesn't matter where that sweet comes from. So I don't like to say never and always, but it's something to be particularly mindful about when choosing to make a sweet treat, when choosing to eat a sweet treat. So if you are at the beginning of your transition, please don't go and make cookies and cupcakes and ice creams and treats and desserts and snack on those throughout the day as you would have before. Oh, look, I have a sugar-free muffin. I put, loads of swerve in it. It tastes great. And maybe even some dates, which are, so natural, but super high in sugar and a really high glycemic response. And, well, gee, how come I put on 5 pounds? Well, it's because, this is what your hormonal response is. So how come I'm always hungry? This is your hormonal response to consistently eating sweet. So in the big picture, yes, there's a definite place. I eat dessert. I know Dr. Carr eats dessert sometimes. And we can talk about mitigating factors once we've overindulged on another podcast. But for the most part, it's a definite reduction. Now, if you need to have your coffee in the morning with a little bit of stevia or a little bit of erythritol, that's not going to set you off for the rest of the day. But if you're having 20 cups of coffee a day with 2 teaspoons of erythritol and heavy cream and a whole bunch of things every single time, that's not necessarily the best thing. Or tea. I know you guys do a lot of tea and it's really sweet. You want to start reducing the sweet, not just replacing it. So I'm going to finish with that. Reduce your sweet, don't replace your sweet.
Yeah. So wonderful. Thank you very much, Michal. So this brings us to the end of our video today on sweeteners. So ideally, you should, again, there is no should. Ideally, if you want to, you need to go off sugar cold turkey, but use, as Michal explained so beautifully, you can use these sweeteners as sort of props to just help you along the journey until you reach a point where you don't miss them and you don't need them anymore. Okay, bye now.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.